Hello, everyone. I haven't done a political video in a while. There was obviously the coronavirus pandemic still going on, and I was watching a lot of what was going on and seeing updates with that. And, Trump's handling of that is not very good, to say the least. But the things with the primary, Democratic primary, were, you know, like winding down, so it didn't really matter. So there wasn't, a lot of political upheaval. Obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, that is upheaval. But we were like kind of getting used to that, what was going on for a couple months, and then the killing of George Floyd happened, and that kind of just set off on other. It set off a different crises, crisis in the middle of a pandemic. So you have multiple crises going on now. Um, so just like briefly, obviously everyone knows about this. I probably don't have to like give much background on this, but George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis and by Derek Chauvin, and there were other officers involved. That were choking him out basically for 9 minutes. Derek Chauvin just was the guy on his he had his knee on his neck, which is like it's just the most plain as day thing possible. It's like I was no one I haven't heard anyone try and defend this, or it's like if you are, you're just basically a white nationalist outright. It's like there's no really talking around this, but it's sparked another debate now about police brutality, which is not necessarily that old. This has been happening throughout our history, and just like 5 years ago, it was a big thing when Black Lives Matter started to kind of gain more notoriety, like that specific movement. And that was sparked by the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson. The history of systemic racism is just not anything new at all. And then just kind of like what happens is we get trapped in these cycles where like now it's a big deal and there's big protests and riots in the street, and people don't like rioting and looting, so that gets very complicated. But, okay. I want to go over what's going on, literally today. I think, was the day that they're putting forth this bill. Yeah, June 8th is, yeah, so this is brand new legislation, and this is honestly, what you want to see Congress doing. It's you want to see actual solutions. And so just before I get into the details, I would say, I think we need to be much more radical in our thinking. We need to be more overarching and, kind of rethinking the systems that we have in our society now. It's just, especially when it comes to policing, we're at the point where it's just brutality. And they're bullying people for no reason. There's constant videos on Twitter and everywhere, and it's example after example of police just being outright bullies. And so I think in a time like this, it really kind of does bring out the worst in everyone. So it's if you want to talk bad about the left-wing side, the Antifa people, it's I'll at least entertain that argument, because I'm not trying to defend violence. I am more on the side of nonviolence, I would say. But, you gotta point out the fault in both sides here. And then that's not what ends up happening, is that people get very polarized. There's a hyperpolarization, and people are in their own kind of camps. So, basically, where I'm coming from is I feel like I'm more in the middle ground, but not what is the middle ground as viewed by, mainstream Democrats. I think a true middle ground is basically more what social democracy, like what Bernie Sanders is putting forth. And maybe I would be a little bit more to the left of Bernie, but that's, splitting hairs. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I think a lot of the times the narratives and the kind of frames of debate that are put out there are not really that representative of the reality and the full historical context. So, okay, this is from NBC, and says Congressional Democrats unveil sweeping police reform bill that would ban chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and drug cases. And this was pretty important. It even mentions here Breonna Taylor's shooting. That was another case where there was a no-knock procedure where they were doing a drug raid into this house, and Breonna Taylor was just happened to be there, was shot. And really, when you look into the details of how that all went down, so you're not announcing yourself, you're not saying that you're police, so that the people inside the room thought that there were people breaking in, and the guy had a gun, and he was a licensed firearm carrier, so he shot first, and then the police shot over 20 shots into the apartment, and then Breonna Taylor was killed. So this is all very mixed up, complicated stuff, but ultimately what it gets down to is I think our police system needs to be fundamentally changed. The priorities that we have are not good, especially when you get into the drug war. That's a bigger issue. But okay, I want to go through this article. So House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other top Democrats in the House and Senate on Monday unveiled far-reaching legislation to overhaul policing in the United States as protests over excessive force by law enforcement against African Americans and others have gripped the nation. The bill, called the Justice in Policing Act, would ban chokeholds, including the kind used by then Minneapolis police officer in the death of George Floyd last month, as well as no-knock warrants in drug cases, as was used in the incident leading to the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, in March, according to a House Democratic aide and a bill summary obtained by NBC News. The legislation, which was more than 200, has more than 200 Democratic co-sponsors in the House and the Senate, would require local police departments to send data on the use of force to the federal government and create a grant program that would allow state attorney generals to create an independent process to investigate misconduct of excessive use of force. According to the 5-page summary of the bill would make it easier for people to recover damages when police departments violate their civil rights, and for the first time would make lynching a federal hate crime. And I really found that surprising. I mean, it's yeah, our history as a nation is pretty messed up, but it's we're just getting to now making lynching a federal hate crime. What the hell is this? I can't even believe that it's 2020 and we have to, say this in our legislation. We have to yeah, we didn't get around to this. What the hell? And so it goes on a little bit more. I want to skip around a little bit, but the measure comes in the wake of massive protests that have swept the nation over the last 2 weeks since Floyd's death while in the custody of Minneapolis police. While some activists have been calling for the defunding of police departments, the bill doesn't shrink police budgets. The legislation also would not provide new funding to police departments to implement the proposed reforms, according to a Senate Democratic aide. And it goes on again, a training program would be created under the bill that would cover racial bias and duty to intervene. And the measure would require that police officers use deadly force only as a last resort and use de-escalation techniques. I had read somewhere in a different article that it was the standard for using force. It wasn't it had to be absolutely necessary. It was only if it was reasonable. That was the word they used. So just reasonable to whom, I guess, is the better question. But so then it says use de-escalation techniques. The measure would also create a federal registry for misconduct complaints and disciplinary actions against police officers. Under the bill, federal uniformed police officers would be required to wear body cameras, and marked federal police vehicles would be required to have dashboard cameras. The legislation would also limit the transfer of military-grade equipment to state and local police departments. So, at the end of the day, this is pretty basic stuff. Not even all that bad from what Campaign Zero has put out there. This is in line with that. I would say probably, this is only a good start. We should really again, be more bold in our approach, more radical, and kind of it's like we almost have to kind of start from scratch, in my view, honestly, in terms of how we train police and how we go about dealing with our society the way it's set up. I mean, like we can't, erase the history of racism in this country and like the conditions that have been set up and all the consequences that have been like that are born out of that. We should be able to like enact policies like if you look at like what's the word reparations for slavery. Like there are things we should and we need to do. I feel like to remedy this because when you look at like the average wealth of a white family versus a black family, like there is a huge disparity. So getting funds and resources like money to people, yes, I think that is a good thing, and that's something that we can do. But in terms of policing, I think we kind of do have to start from scratch in a way. We have to kind of change a lot of the incentive structures that go on, and like there's a lot of private money that goes in policing too. So it's too much built around protecting certain interests, so like the more wealthy interests, and like you police more people of color. This is the historical kind of precedent for such things, like why we have militias, why we had militias in this country for the first time, like was to take down slave rebellions. So when we're talking about what Trump's doing with the Insurrection Act, now we don't, as far as I know, he hasn't like actually issued this. He hasn't done this move yet, but he's just kind of threatening it. The Insurrection Act was something that was, used throughout our history for numerous different reasons. Like I'm saying now, like it was used to go after Nat Turner's slave rebellion, but it was also used for kind of good things, like in the Little Rock Nine case, like to kind of like desegregate schools, and there were white racists that were not going to take kindly to desegregation. So the military was sent in to protect the Little Rock Nine. It was also used with MLK after he died. There were riots, and the military was there to quell the riots. Same thing with Rodney King in 1991 in LA. The military was sent to Los Angeles. So, there's a mixed bag kind of thing going on here. And that's a very crucial thing, and you have to think like, is like military force like on our own civilians, on our own people, with Trump in power? Like, is this anything anyone should entertain ever? And I really do say that seriously because, I mean, like, after everything that has happened now, we have the coronavirus pandemic that was leading up to what happened now with George Floyd. This is totally unstable. And it's like, I don't know how anyone could say that this is normal or that this is, like, something that's just okay with society, that we should be in this place right now. So, in terms of Biden, this is the best situation he could have asked for. Like, this is, like, giving Biden a much better chance to win, honestly. And Biden doesn't necessarily do himself any favors, because, like, his response after George Floyd was killed was basically like, we should train police officers to shoot people in the leg and not the heart. So, like, he really doesn't do himself any favors, so don't, get it twisted. Like, I'm not saying it's in the bag for Biden at all, because I'm not falling into that trap. Hillary, I learned my lesson that time, so I know there's no givens, and especially with Biden, like, it's honestly like that old saying, like, you just give someone enough rope to hang themselves with. Like, that is what Biden is. So, it's the right moment, perhaps, for Biden, but but to get back to Trump real quick, like and what he's threatening to do here, this is a very serious thing, and I don't think people actually contemplate the implications of this because it's literally kind of like starting the second Civil War. There's protests in 50 states, in all 50 states, about Black Lives Matter as a response to George Floyd's death, and Antifa is being classified as terrorism, like officially, and just quickly on that, like Antifa is not it's not like really any one organization. It's not, because the whole idea of Antifa is it's reactionary. It's when there is fascism, when there is white nationalists and racists out in the open affirming their beliefs, which is what happened when Trump was elected. I mean, you may not like that these people support Trump per se, but it's like you can't say that doesn't exist or it doesn't count or something. When Trump won and when he was inaugurated, a lot of this stuff happened. There were white nationalists out there like crazy, like Richard Spencer, and they were like victimizing people of color, like saying like you are not welcome, essentially. And so anti-fascism is a reactionary movement in that sense that like when fascists are not around, you're not going to see Antifa. And I mean honestly, like in a lot of ways, I think Trump is a lot like every other typical Republican. He's kind of just not as good as hiding these really bad racist tendencies. I think a lot of the other Republicans basically believe the same things effectively. They're just kind of better at masking these ideas in ways that where people are going to pick that up and not necessarily get the outright racism of it. Basically is the best way I could put it. So Trump is at once like every other Republican, but he is unique, I think. It's a very kind of contradictory thing. He does everything that they would want, ultimately. He's just not good at kind of doing the theatrics, really. Like, he does his kind of own thing. And so he's not in the business of, like, when there's a crisis going on, there's multiple crises going on, he's not going to be the guy who's going to unify everyone. He's just going to kind of be the troll guy, and in this case, kind of, pushing us down the path more of a police state and totalitarianism. Because, listen, putting the military out in the streets all over the country to quell these rioters and looters, like so we'll get into that. That's the main point I'm making, is that even if you want to say that it's only the rioters and looters are bad, like we just want to go after them. People are allowed to protest, that's fine. If they're peaceful, yeah. It's just not going to be that perfect world. It won't. They're going to go after everyone that is on the street. If you're out there past the curfew, then you're going to get shot with tear gas, basically. So this is absolutely a threat to your First Amendment rights to free speech. And like I just said before, it is going down more the path of totalitarianism. And it makes me honestly think that like all these dystopian movies were actually kind of onto something when, like, they say, like A Clockwork Orange, like, honestly comes to mind. But just like people will casually accept, just brute force and constant oppression of, the military, like, or just like, police constantly in your life, like, controlling everything. Like, they'll accept all that just for some kind of semblance of normalcy, of like law and order. and this is what they promise. This is what Trump is all about, is law and order president, and this is not an old concept either. Nixon ran on this style of kind of politics too, to a degree. So we're in a not a good state, of course. I mean, like that should be pretty easy to see. But so in terms of the rioters and the looters, I don't really support such violence. Like I don't want to say that it's okay to go after like just everyday people who like have a small business or something, and then that's torn down. Like that form of property damage kind of is violence. I could see why people would say that. But on the other hand, you kind of have to look at the historical context and see, like when MLK was assassinated, there were riots in the streets, and there were very specific demands for another Civil Rights Act, essentially, that was passed within 6 days in the Congress. So it is kind of a political pressure that could work, and I would just say, like, you've got to be more strategic, perhaps. Like, you shouldn't go after just everyday people who have a small business. That's not right. If you're going after like a big corporation that would is basically buying your politicians and screwing you over, like that, if you go after only bad actors, I could see almost like why it is an effective strategy to loot. But I don't. It's like I don't necessarily think it's the hill I want to die on to try and like defend rioting and looting. Like I want to be on the side of nonviolence, and the data and history shows that like when the civil rights movement is more not nonviolent, people are going to be on your side and not for the police. When I believe that was in Selma, Alabama, when like MLK was like protesting like on this bridge, and there was the police, and they like sick dogs on them, and had fire hoses, and the like MLK's people were completely nonviolent. They weren't even gonna retaliate if the police did anything, and the world saw that, and it was a little bit different, obviously, because it's not as if the conscience of the world changed and the country changed. There was a lot of people that still were racist and were against MLK. And in fact, I mean, he was completely nonviolent and he was killed. So like I say, like the history of systemic racism is there's a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot of things to take into account. It's ultimately not a simple thing, and it's not a simple fix. It's kind of like like we want to. I'm someone who thinks that we need some form of a police force. Like people said they want to defund the police, and I would see defunding it. Like not getting rid of it completely, but like they shouldn't. There's things that are way over the top, like the NYPD is like honestly like comparable to most countries' armies. So there's like things we could scale down, I think, for sure, and demilitarize. But I think there should be some form of a police, and there's people on the left that probably wouldn't agree with that. They want to like abolish police. And it's always like I want to know exactly what that entails. It's like if you abolish police, then like what happens in everyday life? Like, and there's violent criminals and things like so. It's complicated, and this is not at all a new issue. Like this is something, like I say, that crops up every few years, and people kind of shake their heads, and they get into this vicious cycle. And so I think an important message to take away is like we can't fall into this trap again, because It's like we see a vicious killing. In this case with George Floyd, it was just like undeniable. The guy shouldn't have died. He was accused of like forging a $20 bill, and the dude is in handcuffs, and there's like three police officers on him. One is on his neck, his knee is on his neck. It was so plain as day that this was not necessary, and there was like even ridiculous talk about like the autopsy, or one of them, I guess, maybe performed by people in the government or in the police department. I don't know, but like they were saying there were health conditions related to George Floyd's death, and it's just like absolutely absurd. That they would really say things like this, and I even see Bill Barr saying like pepper spray, like when you use on people, is like not a chemical irritant. So just quick point there is like this is like definite Orwellian times, and again like dystopia, totalitarianism. Like this is honestly the path that we're headed down. I feel like it's like obviously not that bad yet, but this is like the small seeds of things that kind of push it along. And we're going after peaceful protesters. Like this is not anything in question at all. It's not as if we're just cracking down on only wrongdoers. There's people out there who want to give voice to an issue and like are not a threat to anyone, and police are being bullies to them, and in many cases harming them very much so. I saw a video of a cop on a police horse like trample a woman. Like this is horrible, horrible stuff going on. But okay, I mean, to wrap it up, it's like I don't know where to go with this, but how we can remain hopeful in these times. Only to say, I guess, like Congress is gonna do its thing. Like of course, it's never gonna pass in the Senate. Probably in a Republican-controlled Senate, this police reform bill. Like I don't think any of them care about what they're protesting about. To be honest, they're not going to go along with what we want. So it is important that the Democrats at least push it, though, that they show that they're on the side of justice, and even if it's not, if it's just like kind of like a half measure what they're putting forward, at least they're trying to do something and show we have some sort of solution to this problem. Because ultimately, yeah, the Democrats need to offer a vision, and that's what I've always said, is like, even though in this time now it's hard to tell if, Trump is just viewed as so incompetent and basically unstable, because it's like, of course, with everything that's going on, even if you like Trump, I don't know how you could say anything is stable right now. So it's like, if we're all on the same page with this, it's like, basically like that anti-Trump sentiment, I don't know if that alone can win it for Biden. And I'm assuming Biden will be the nominee. That's pretty clear, I guess, at this point. I mean, Bernie is not going to probably get enough support in the convention, even if anything were to go down. Unless like Biden just completely implodes overnight, it's like it's going to be Biden as the nominee. I just hope at the end of the day that the Democrats, the good ones that are out there, they're gonna push for things and solutions that people want to hear, and we've got to push Biden more to the left. We got to get him on board with Medicare for all, honestly. It's like, this is like long overdue. And honestly, like just that issue alone, if Biden got on board with Medicare for all and like did nothing else, I think that would be a big game changer for the election. So, it's made me think twice a little bit about what's going on this election. Everything that's been going on, so I just hope there's something good to come of it.